Human history is written as a story of beginnings, of the first cities, the first tools, the first civilizations rising from primitive origins. But buried beneath that familiar narrative lies a far more unsettling possibility, that civilization did not begin with us, and that the world we inherited was not untouched, but rebuilt. Across the planet, the Earth itself carries scars that suggest a moment when the continuity of human progress was violently interrupted. Not by gradual decline, not by cultural collapse, but by an event so vast that it erased entire ways of life from the surface of the world. Geological records tell a story few dare to connect to human history. Layers of sediment reveal sudden, catastrophic flooding. Ice cores show temperature shifts occurring not over millennia, but within decades. Megafauna vanish almost simultaneously across continents. Coastlines retreat. Entire land masses disappear beneath rising seas. These are not the fingerprints of normal environmental change. They are the marks of planetary trauma. What makes this evidence impossible to ignore is timing. Many of these events converge around the same period, the end of the last ice age, a moment when the world transformed rapidly and violently. If human societies existed before this transformation, they would not have faded quietly. They would have been destroyed, overwhelmed by water, climate chaos, and ecological collapse. Ancient myths across every continent remember this moment: floods that swallowed the world, fire falling from the sky, a time when humanity stood on the edge of extinction. These stories are often dismissed as symbolism, but myths are rarely invented without cause. They are memories compressed by time, shaped by survival, and passed down because forgetting them once had consequences. This documentary begins with a forbidden question. What if modern civilization is not the first chapter of human achievement, but the second? What if the silence before history is not emptiness, but erasure? And if the world truly ended once before, what allowed humanity to return? If civilization existed before the last global collapse, its remains would not stand proudly on the surface. They would be buried, broken, drowned, and scattered, hidden not by conspiracy, but by time itself. And that is precisely where evidence begins to appear. Across the world, archaeologists and geologists encounter anomalies that defy conventional explanations. Structures too old, stones too heavy, precision too advanced. Foundations buried beneath layers of sediment that predate known cultures by thousands of years. Beneath the oceans lie submerged landscapes that were once dry land. Sonar mapping has revealed rectilinear formations, walls, and platforms far below modern sea levels. These are not natural features. They align, repeat, and form patterns consistent with human design. On land, radar surveys beneath jungles and deserts expose vast networks, roads, grids, terraces, extending far beyond what early societies should have been capable of constructing. Mainstream history treats these findings as isolated curiosities, but viewed together, they form a pattern impossible to dismiss. A pattern suggesting a world that was once organized, connected, and engineered before rising seas erased its coastlines and forced survivors inland. Sea levels rose more than 100 meters after the Ice Age, drowning entire regions where early civilization would most logically have formed. If cities existed there, they would now rest beneath oceans, inaccessible and forgotten. Civilization would appear to restart inland, giving the illusion of a sudden beginning where there was actually a desperate recovery. What we call the birth of civilization may instead be its re-emergence from the ruins of a world that came before. A collapse of this magnitude would not leave the planet empty. it would leave survivors, small, scattered, traumatized groups carrying fragments of a broken world. And across ancient traditions, these survivors appear again and again. They are remembered not as refugees, but as teachers, culture bearers, architects of renewal. Early civilizations speak of mysterious figures who arrived after great destruction, bringing agriculture, astronomy, law, and construction techniques that seem to appear fully formed. These figures did not evolve gradually from local cultures. They emerged suddenly, taught foundational knowledge, and then disappeared. Over time, memory transformed them into gods, demigods, or mythical sages. But strip away the symbolism and a simpler explanation remains. They were survivors, people who remembered how the world once worked and attempted to rebuild it with limited resources and fading knowledge. Their purpose was not domination, but continuity. As generations passed, knowledge degraded, precision became ritual, science became myth. The memory of a prior world faded into legend. Humanity did not forget because it was careless, it forgot because survival demanded adaptation, not preservation. Civilization, as we know it, may be the descendant of loss. And if that is true, then history is not a line moving forward, but a cycle struggling to remember itself. At the end of the last ice age, the Earth did not simply warm, it transformed. Ice sheets thousands of meters thick collapsed, releasing unimaginable volumes of water into the oceans. Coastlines shifted violently, plains vanished, entire ecosystems were erased within human lifetimes. Geological evidence confirms that sea levels rose not slowly, but in pulses, sudden surges that reshaped the planet again and again. For any civilization living along ancient coastlines, this would not have been a gradual inconvenience. It would have been an apocalypse. What makes this moment extraordinary is how precisely it aligns with humanity's oldest stories. From Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, from India to Scandinavia, cultures with no contact describe the same event, a great flood that destroyed a previous world. The similarities are too consistent to dismiss. Rising waters, chosen survivors, knowledge preserved, a rebirth after destruction. These are not abstract metaphors, they are structured narratives of survival. Modern science confirms that massive meltwater pulses occurred around 12,000 years ago, flooding coastal regions at terrifying speed. Settlements built near rivers and shores, the natural birthplaces of civilization, would have been the first to disappear. The survivors would have fled inland, carrying trauma, memory, and fragments of knowledge. Over generations, those memories would become sacred stories, not because they were imaginary, but because forgetting them once nearly ended everything. This is the moment when myth and science converge, not as enemies, but as different languages describing the same catastrophe. The flood was real, the world did end, and civilization, whatever form it once had, did not survive intact. What followed was not progress, it was recovery. Imagine a world after collapse, not empty, but wounded. Survivors scattered across continents, stripped of infrastructure, isolated from one another, forced to adapt with limited tools. This is the environment in which post-collapse civilization would emerge, not from innovation, but from memory, not from discovery, but from reconstruction. Archaeological timelines suggest that advanced practices, agriculture, astronomy, architecture, appear abruptly in multiple regions after the flood period. These skills do not evolve slowly from trial and error. They arrive almost fully formed. Fields are planted, monuments aligned to the stars, societies organized with surprising efficiency. This sudden sophistication has long puzzled historians, but it makes sense if knowledge was inherited rather than invented. The survivors of the Old World would not rebuild everything. They would prioritize what mattered most: food production, seasonal tracking, shelter, and social order. Complex technologies would be lost, precision would decline, knowledge would simplify. Over generations, what remained would appear miraculous to descendants who no longer understood its origin. This explains why early civilizations often describe their founders as outsiders, wise beings who came from elsewhere, taught essential skills, and vanished. These were not gods, they were survivors whose world no longer existed. Civilization did not begin cleanly. It limped forward from catastrophe, carrying scars disguised as myths. Rebuilding a world does not guarantee remembering it. As generations passed, survivors died, languages changed, and explanations simplified. What was once science became ritual. What was once engineering became sacred geometry. What was once memory became myth. This is not failure, it is human nature. Oral traditions preserved only what could be remembered emotionally. Dates vanished, technical detail faded, stories remained, because stories survive when facts cannot. Over centuries, descendants no longer understood that their monuments reflected lost knowledge of astronomy and mathematics. They only knew the structures were ancient, powerful, and important. This is how civilizations forget their origins, not through neglect, but through adaptation. The more successful the new world became, the less need there was to remember the old one. Eventually, humanity began to believe it had always been this way, that civilization began from nothing, that there was no before. But the earth remembers. Beneath soil, sand, and sea, fragments remain. Foundations too deep, stones too heavy, alignments too precise. They are reminders of a world erased so completely that it feels impossible. Yet impossible things leave evidence, and every discovery pulls us closer to a truth history was never meant to hide, only unable to preserve. Across the world stand structures that challenge the limits of ancient capability, not because they are old, but because of how they were built. Massive stone blocks weighing tens, sometimes hundreds of tons, were quarried, transported, lifted, and placed with a precision that modern engineers still struggle to replicate. These are not crude constructions, they are deliberate, exact, and repeatable across continents. At sites scattered from South America to the Mediterranean, stone blocks fit together so tightly that a blade cannot slide between them. Their surfaces are flat to a degree that implies advanced shaping techniques. Angles are consistent, cuts are smooth, and the scale is staggering. These structures were not built for temporary use, they were meant to endure. Conventional explanations often rely on human labor alone, ropes, ramps, brute force, but such theories break down when confronted with geological reality. Some blocks were transported uphill over kilometers, others were lifted to heights that would require coordination beyond simple trial and error. The absence of tool marks associated with primitive methods raises further questions. What tools were used, and why are they missing? The most unsettling aspect is age. In several cases, these megalithic foundations predate the civilizations credited with building atop them. Later cultures reused what they could not replicate. They inherited stonework already ancient, already monumental. This suggests not a gradual progression, but a loss of capability. These stones are not anomalies, they are evidence of a forgotten mastery, fragments of a civilization capable of reshaping landscapes, now remembered only through structures too large to erase. Engineering leaves fingerprints. Choices made during construction reflect the tools, knowledge, and priorities of the builders. When examined closely, ancient megalithic sites reveal patterns that are difficult to reconcile with simple technology. Stone surfaces exhibit uniform curvature. Drill holes maintain consistent diameters. Symmetry appears where functionality alone would suffice. These are signs of standardization, not improvisation. In multiple locations, hard stone appears to have been shaped with a level of control inconsistent with copper or stone tools. Granite, diorite, and basalt, materials resistant to abrasion, were cut and polished with astonishing smoothness. Experimental archaeology struggles to reproduce these results even with modern replicas of ancient tools. The gap between theory and evidence remains wide. What makes this more compelling is repetition. These techniques appear globally across cultures separated by oceans. Identical construction principles emerge independently unless they share a common origin. Knowledge does not usually evolve in parallel at such precision, it spreads. If this knowledge belonged to a civilization predating the flood, its loss would explain the abrupt decline in architectural sophistication. Later societies inherited ruins they revered but could not recreate. Over time, reverence replaced understanding. These structures are not proof of fantasy technology. They are proof of capability that existed, vanished, and left behind questions we are only beginning to ask. When viewed individually, ancient sites seem mysterious, but when viewed together, they form a pattern, one that suggests coordination rather than coincidence. Megalithic structures across the globe share common characteristics: orientation to cardinal directions, alignment with celestial events, and placement along geologically stable zones. This is not random. It is planning on a planetary scale. Some sites align with solstices and equinoxes with remarkable accuracy. Others appear positioned along lines that encircle the Earth, lines later mythologized as sacred pathways. These patterns imply a deep understanding of astronomy, geography, and time, knowledge that requires long-term observation, precise measurement, and shared standards. Such consistency raises an uncomfortable question. How did ancient societies, supposedly isolated and primitive, achieve global coherence in design? The answer may be that they did not originate separately. They inherited fragments of a once unified system. If a pre-collapse civilization spanned coastlines now submerged, its reach would have been global. When it fell, knowledge fractured. What remained were echoes, stone, alignment, myth, distributed among cultures that no longer remembered their shared source. The ruins do not tell us who these people were, but they tell us they were not isolated, and they were not accidental. They were part of a world that understood itself as connected until it was torn apart. Long before written language became widespread, the sky served as humanity's first library. The movement of the stars, the rhythm of the sun, and the cycles of the moon were not simply observed, they were studied, recorded, and encoded into stone. Across ancient sites worldwide, monuments align with celestial events so precisely that chance can be ruled out entirely. Solstices, equinoxes, eclipses, and long-term stellar cycles were marked with accuracy that demands generations of observation. This level of astronomical knowledge is not trivial. To track celestial movements over centuries requires continuity, discipline, and a stable intellectual tradition. Yet many of these alignments appear in societies believed to lack writing, mathematics, or advanced instruments. The contradiction is striking. How did cultures with limited technology achieve measurements that modern astronomers confirm with digital tools? The answer may be that this knowledge was not discovered in isolation, it was inherited. Survivors of a pre-collapse civilization would have preserved astronomical understanding because it was essential, not symbolic. The sky was a clock, a calendar, and a warning system. It tracked seasons, climate cycles, and potentially catastrophic events. When architecture is aligned to the heavens, it transforms into a permanent record, stone replacing paper, geometry replacing ink. These monuments were not built merely to honor gods, they were built to remember time itself. If knowledge was lost on earth, the sky remained unchanged, and those who remembered how to read it held the last connection to a world that no longer existed. Modern civilizations measure time in years, decades, and centuries. Ancient civilizations, however, often measured time in cycles, vast repeating patterns spanning thousands of years. This perspective suggests a worldview shaped not by short-term survival, but by long-term awareness. Many ancient calendars tracked not only seasonal change, but celestial cycles so large they exceed the lifespan of any individual observer. Some of these cycles correspond to known astronomical phenomena, such as the slow wobble of Earth's axis, which completes a full cycle every 26,000 years. This motion subtly alters star positions over millennia, yet ancient cultures encoded it into myth and monument. Such knowledge cannot be discovered accidentally. It requires precise observation sustained across generations. Why would early societies invest so much effort into tracking such distant cycles? The answer may lie in catastrophe. Long-term astronomical cycles influence climate, solar radiation, and cosmic exposure. A civilization that survived global collapse would understand the danger of ignoring these rhythms. Calendars were not created merely to track harvests, they were survival tools. They marked moments when the world became unstable, times of flood, drought, or cosmic disturbance. When knowledge degraded, these warnings became ceremonial, misunderstood, but still preserved. Time to ancient civilizations was not linear, it was circular, and the end of one age was never truly the end, only the beginning of another. If a civilization expected to fall, it would not leave casual records. It would leave warnings, messages designed to survive destruction, language loss, and cultural collapse. Stone monuments, mythic narratives, and astronomical alignments may have served this purpose. They were not built for beauty alone, they were built for endurance. Across cultures, stories repeat a familiar theme: cycles of destruction followed by renewal, floods, fire, darkness, and rebirth. These stories often include instructions: who survives, where to go, what knowledge must be preserved. Such consistency suggests intention rather than coincidence. Encoding warnings in myth ensures survival when literacy fails. Encoding them in stone ensures survival when memory fades. Encoding them in the sky ensures survival when Earth itself changes. The tragedy is that warnings only work if they are understood. As time passed, meaning eroded, ritual replaced instruction, symbol replaced explanation. Humanity inherited the message but lost the key. What remains are fragments scattered across the planet, waiting to be reassembled. Not because the past demands attention, but because the future may depend on it. The question is no longer whether ancient civilizations were advanced, The question is whether they were trying to tell us something, and whether we are prepared to listen this time. One of the most unsettling realizations in the study of lost civilizations is that collapse does not appear to be rare. It appears to be cyclical. Geological records reveal multiple periods where the Earth underwent rapid, violent change, long before modern industry, long before recorded history. These events are not evenly spaced, nor are they random. They follow patterns tied to climate shifts, solar activity, and cosmic cycles far larger than human politics or technology. Ancient civilizations seemed to understand this. Myths from around the world described not a single destruction, but many. Worlds of fire, worlds of water, worlds swallowed by darkness. Each ending is followed by renewal, but never without loss. Knowledge is fragmented, memory fades, humanity begins again, convinced each time that it is the first. What makes this terrifying is not the existence of catastrophe, but its predictability. The survivors of previous collapses appear to have recognized the signs. Their monuments and myths emphasize cycles, not permanence. They did not build for eternity, they built to warn. Modern civilization, by contrast, believes in linear progress. We assume collapse is an exception, not a rule. Yet the Earth's history suggests otherwise. Civilizations rise during stable windows and fall when those windows close. The question is not if collapse happens, but whether awareness can change the outcome. The ruins around us are not evidence of failure, they are evidence of repetition. Ancient civilizations watched the sky not out of curiosity, but out of fear. Celestial movements were not abstract, they were signals. Comets, unusual solar activity, shifting stars, and eclipses were recorded with obsession. These phenomena were believed to coincide with times of upheaval, when the balance of the world became unstable. Modern science confirms that celestial events can influence Earth dramatically. Solar storms disrupt climate and technology. Asteroid impacts alter ecosystems. Changes in Earth's orbit affect long-term climate cycles. These are not speculative ideas, they are measurable forces. The ancients did not fear the sky because they misunderstood it. They feared it because they remembered what it could do. Monuments aligned to stars may have functioned as early detection systems, ways to track slow cosmic shifts invisible within a single lifetime. When alignments changed, when cycles completed, danger approached. As knowledge degraded, these warnings lost clarity. What began as observation became ritual. What began as science became prophecy. But the fear remained embedded in myth. The heavens will return. We no longer build monuments to track the sky. We rely on technology. But technology is fragile. Stone endures. Every civilization believes it is unique until it discovers the ruins beneath its feet. Today, humanity stands at a threshold similar to those who came before. Climate instability, environmental stress, technological dependence, social fragmentation. These are not new conditions. They are familiar patterns repeating under different names. The ancients left us fragments, not answers. They could not prevent collapse, but they tried to preserve awareness. Their monuments do not beg for worship, they demand attention. They ask a single question across millennia: have you learned? We stand where they once stood, advanced, confident, and unaware of how fragile the system truly is. The difference is scale. Our collapse would not be regional, it would be global. The past is no longer silent, it is speaking louder than ever. The choice is not whether collapse will come, but whether memory can interrupt the cycle. This is the moment where history stops being a story and becomes a warning. The most unsettling evidence of a forgotten civilization is not hidden in remote jungles or deep oceans. It exists directly beneath the foundations of what we call history. Across the ancient world, archaeologists have repeatedly encountered a strange and uncomfortable pattern. The oldest structures are often the most advanced, while later constructions appear simplified, repaired, or even crude by comparison. This reversal of progress contradicts everything modern civilization assumes about technological evolution. In site after site, massive stone foundations lie buried beneath later temples, cities, and religious centers. These lower layers exhibit extraordinary precision, perfect right angles, interlocking stone blocks, and engineering solutions that withstand earthquakes and time itself. The cultures that built above them clearly recognized their superiority, choosing not to dismantle these ancient foundations but to reuse them. They inherited stonework they could not reproduce. Scientific analysis deepens the mystery. Erosion patterns suggest extreme age. Geological uplift and sediment layers indicate that some of these structures existed before dramatic climate shifts reshaped the planet. In several cases, mainstream chronologies are forced to stretch or fragment to avoid confronting the obvious implication. These structures predate known civilizations by thousands of years. This is not a fringe idea supported by isolated anomalies. It is a recurring global pattern. When evidence appears in one place, it can be dismissed. When it appears everywhere, dismissal becomes denial. The most difficult truth is this: if these structures belong to a civilization older than our historical timeline, then humanity has already reached advanced levels once before and lost them. The silence before history is not emptiness, it is erasure. Civilizations rarely collapse overnight. They decay quietly through forgetting. The lost civilization that preceded us appears to have understood this danger more than any culture since. Their remaining traces do not celebrate power or conquest. They emphasize continuity, balance, and awareness. This alone suggests a society shaped by survival rather than dominance. Yet even the most profound knowledge is fragile when removed from its original context. As survivors rebuilt after catastrophe, priorities shifted toward immediate survival. Over generations, complex systems were simplified. Advanced understanding became rules of thumb. Precise science became symbolic ritual. Eventually, the reasons behind those rituals were lost entirely. This is not failure, it is entropy applied to memory. Monuments that once encoded astronomical and environmental data became sacred sites. Alignments that once tracked cycles of danger became ceremonial dates. Warnings designed to save future generations slowly transformed into mythology. The message survived, but the meaning did not. This pattern repeats everywhere. What begins as instruction becomes tradition. What begins as survival knowledge becomes belief. And belief, once detached from understanding, cannot prevent collapse. The tragedy is not that ancient civilizations failed to preserve knowledge. The tragedy is that they preserved it in the only way they could, and it still wasn't enough. Forgetting was not a choice, it was a consequence of time. The most disturbing aspect of this story is not what happened to the civilization before us, but how familiar their final moments feel. Stability returned, confidence grew, systems expanded. Warnings were remembered, but no longer feared. The very success of reconstruction created the conditions for repetition. Modern civilization stands at an eerily similar threshold. Our systems are vast, interconnected, and efficient, yet fragile. We store memory digitally, assuming permanence, while ignoring how easily it can vanish. We believe complexity equals resilience, despite history proving the opposite. The ancient world built with stone because they expected collapse. We build with speed because we assume continuity. This is the difference that may decide everything. We look at ancient ruins as remnants of failure. In truth, they are reminders of survival and warnings of what survival could not prevent. Collapse did not come because the ancients lacked intelligence. It came because awareness faded faster than danger. The past is no longer distant. It is reflective. The final question this documentary asks is not whether a lost civilization existed, but whether this civilization will become one. If the civilization before us truly anticipated collapse, then its most important legacy would not be its buildings, its tools, or even its technology. Its most important legacy would be its warning. And that warning was not delivered through words alone. It was embedded into landscape, architecture, myth, and time itself, designed to survive when language, culture, and memory failed. Across the ancient world, we find the same message expressed differently. The world does not remain stable forever. The sky changes, the seas rise, the earth shifts. These are not divine punishments, they are cycles. Civilizations that fail to recognize them do not disappear because they are weak, but because they are unprepared. What makes this warning extraordinary is its persistence. Despite collapse, flood, erosion, and cultural fragmentation, the core message endured. It survived not because it was preserved deliberately, but because it was encoded redundantly. If one culture failed, another remembered. If one monument fell, another remained. The message was scattered across the planet so that forgetting it entirely would be nearly impossible. And yet, remembering fragments is not the same as understanding the whole. The ancients did not leave a single instruction manual for survival. They left a framework for awareness. They assumed future civilizations would be intelligent enough to recognize patterns, to compare myths with geology, to connect sky with stone. They trusted that awareness itself would be enough. That trust may have been misplaced, because the warning was never meant to inspire fear, it was meant to inspire preparation. And preparation requires humility, the willingness to accept that progress does not make us immune to nature's cycles. The warning still exists. The question is whether it has arrived in time. There comes a moment when history stops being a record of what was and becomes a guide for what must be done. This is that moment. The study of lost civilizations is no longer an academic curiosity, it is a rehearsal for survival. Modern science now confirms many of the dangers ancient civilizations feared: climate instability, rising seas, solar activity, ecological collapse. These are not distant threats, they are active processes. The difference is that we understand them intellectually, but not culturally. Awareness exists in data, not in collective behavior. The ancient world embedded knowledge into daily life. Astronomy governed agriculture. Seasonal cycles shaped social order. Survival depended on attention. We have separated knowledge from experience, assuming technology will compensate for awareness. But technology does not replace preparation, it amplifies consequences. The civilization before us may not have been able to stop collapse, but it tried to ensure that future generations would not face it blindly. Their greatest achievement was not mastery of nature, but recognition of its power. If we are to break the cycle, It will not be through domination or denial. It will be through integration, aligning civilization with planetary rhythms rather than forcing them into submission. This is the moment where the past extends a hand to the future. Whether we take it remains uncertain. Every lost civilization believed, at some point, that it would endure. Their cities were vast, their knowledge sophisticated, their confidence absolute. And yet, all that remains are fragments: stone, myth, and silence. We are no different. The difference is that we now know this has happened before. This knowledge places humanity in a unique position. We are the first civilization aware that civilization itself is fragile. The first to recognize that collapse is not a failure of intelligence, but a failure of memory, humility, and preparation. The ancients could only warn. We can choose. The final question of this documentary is not meant to comfort, it is meant to linger. When future beings look back on our world, whatever form they take, will they see monuments of awareness or ruins of denial? History does not repeat itself because it must. It repeats because civilizations refuse to listen. The past has spoken. What we do next determines whether this story ends here or begins again. One of the greatest illusions shared by every advanced civilization is the belief that continuity is guaranteed. Roads feel permanent. Cities feel immovable. Knowledge feels cumulative. Yet history shows that civilization is not a structure, it is a condition, and conditions can change. The lost civilization before us understood something modern humanity struggles to accept, that progress does not protect against collapse. In fact, progress often accelerates it. As systems grow more complex, they become more efficient, but also more fragile. When a simple society fails, it fractures. When a complex one fails, it cascades. Ancient builders embedded this understanding into their work. Their monuments were not declarations of dominance, but acknowledgments of impermanence. Stone was chosen not because it was impressive, but because it endured after everything else failed. These structures were not built for their present, they were built for an uncertain future. Modern civilization builds for speed, scale, and growth. Memory is stored digitally, dependent on uninterrupted systems. Infrastructure is optimized for efficiency, not resilience. We assume continuity because we have never experienced global collapse within recorded history. The civilization before us had. Their awareness shaped everything they left behind. They did not attempt to freeze the world in place. They attempted to remind future generations that stability is temporary and preparation is essential. Civilization is not a destination, it is a phase, and phases, by definition, end. When civilizations collapse, most things vanish quickly. Written records decay. Technology fails. Infrastructure collapses. What survives is rarely what was most valued. It is what was most resilient. Stone survives. Stories survive. Patterns survive. The civilization before us appears to have understood this intuitively. They did not rely on fragile systems to transmit knowledge. They relied on redundancy. If writing failed, myth survived. If myth failed, stone remained. If stone eroded, the sky remained unchanged. This layered approach to memory suggests foresight born from experience. They did not expect to preserve everything. They expected to lose almost all of it. Their goal was not preservation of detail, but preservation of awareness. What survives collapse is not complexity, it is simplicity anchored in truth. Modern civilization preserves enormous amounts of data, but little wisdom. We archive endlessly, but rarely prioritize what matters most. We preserve facts without context, knowledge without meaning. The past did the opposite. It preserved meaning even as facts dissolved. If collapse comes again, the question is not what technologies we lose, but what values endure. Awareness, humility, attention to cycles, respect for limits. These are the only technologies that have ever survived the end of worlds. The lost civilization did not leave us instructions for salvation. It left us responsibility. Responsibility to observe, to remember, to recognize that we are not exceptional, but recurring. This is the silent handoff between ages, the moment where the past steps back and the present steps forward. We have more data than any civilization before us, more tools, more reach, but awareness is not measured in capability, it is measured in restraint. The ancient world reached the limits of its understanding and left markers for those who would come after. We are now standing among those markers, able to interpret them for the first time with modern science. This creates an obligation no civilization before us has carried, the obligation to break the cycle. The ruins do not demand worship, they demand reflection. They ask us to see civilization not as an achievement to defend, but as a process to steward. The past is finished speaking. What remains is our response. Every civilization reaches a moment when it must decide what kind of ancestor it wants to become. Most never realize that moment has arrived until it has passed. The civilization before us did not have the luxury of foresight. We do. They left behind fragments, not because they wanted to be remembered, but because they wanted future civilizations to see themselves clearly. Their ruins are not monuments to success, they are mirrors. Awareness is the only inheritance that transcends collapse. Power fades, wealth dissolves, technology fails, but awareness, when embedded into culture, can survive even the end of worlds. This is the choice before us now, to continue expanding without restraint, assuming solutions will appear when needed, or to slow, observe, and align civilization with the rhythms that govern this planet. The past does not demand sacrifice, it demands attention. If we choose awareness, the story does not end in ruins, it evolves. Civilization becomes adaptive rather than fragile. Progress becomes measured rather than reckless. The lost civilization did not fail because it lacked intelligence, it failed because it reached a threshold without preparation. We stand at that same threshold, this time with memory. Stories endure not because they are ancient, but because they become relevant again. This story matters now because the conditions that ended the last great civilization are no longer hypothetical. They are measurable. We monitor the sky, we track the seas, we observe the planet's systems shifting in real time. The difference is not awareness, it is response. The ancient world lacked our tools, but possessed something we have lost: restraint, rooted in reverence. They understood limits not as restrictions, but as survival strategies. This documentary is not an accusation, it is an invitation to see humanity not as conqueror of Earth, but as participant within it. The final lesson of the lost civilization is simple. Survival is not achieved by domination, but by synchronization. If we ignore this lesson, we will not disappear suddenly. We will fade gradually through instability, fragmentation, and loss of meaning. If we listen, something unprecedented becomes possible: a civilization that remembers. One day, long after our cities have quieted, someone or something will study the remains of our world. They will search for patterns, meanings, warnings. They will ask whether we understood what came before us. This documentary is not meant to end with certainty. It is meant to leave a question unresolved, because unresolved questions demand engagement. The past has already completed its task. It rose, it learned, it warned, it fell. Now the responsibility belongs to us. Whether this civilization becomes a turning point or another chapter in a repeating pattern will depend on choices made quietly, collectively, and long before collapse is visible. If you remember one thing from this story, let it be this: civilizations do not die when they lose power. They die when they lose awareness. The future is watching. What kind of ancestor will we be? Every collapse is followed by silence, not immediately, but inevitably. After the final city empties, after the last light fades, after the final voice is lost, the world does not mourn. It continues. Wind moves through abandoned streets, forests reclaim stone, oceans erase coastlines. The planet has no memory of empires, only processes. This is the silence the lost civilization entered. There were no final speeches, no recorded farewells, only absence. And yet, in that silence, something extraordinary happened. Meaning endured. The ruins we study today were not meant to speak loudly. They were meant to wait, to outlast noise, to persist long enough for another civilization to stand where they once stood and ask the same questions. Silence is not emptiness, it is space for recognition. We tend to imagine collapse as dramatic. In reality, it is quiet, gradual, normalized, until one day it is complete. The civilization before us did not vanish overnight. It faded while believing it would recover, while trusting continuity, while assuming tomorrow would resemble yesterday. That assumption has ended civilizations more reliably than catastrophe itself. Silence follows not because the world is cruel, but because it is indifferent. And indifference is the most powerful force in nature. Time does not care about intention. It does not reward ambition. It does not remember greatness. Time erodes everything equally. Civilizations measure success in centuries. Time measures existence in geological breaths. From this perspective, humanity is still young, but youth does not guarantee endurance. In fact, youth often mistakes momentum for permanence. The lost civilization reached a level of complexity that made it confident and therefore vulnerable. Complexity creates dependencies. Dependencies create fragility. Fragility creates collapse. This is not a moral judgment. It is a pattern. Time has witnessed this pattern repeatedly. It will witness it again, unless something changes. Awareness alone does not guarantee survival, but absence of awareness guarantees failure. The value of studying lost civilizations is not nostalgia, it is calibration. It reminds us that we are not separate from history, we are within it. Time will pass whether we prepare or not. The only variable is what remains meaningful when it does. This documentary does not conclude with answers. It concludes with perspective. The lost civilization has already completed its journey. It rose, it learned, it warned, it vanished. We are still writing ours. Whether this age becomes a bridge to something wiser or another layer of ruins is not decided by technology, politics, or power. It is decided by attention. Attention to cycles, attention to limits, attention to the quiet signals history leaves behind. If this story lingers with you, that is its purpose, not to inform, but to awaken. Because civilizations do not disappear when they are destroyed, they disappear when they are forgotten. And forgetting always begins long before collapse. This is where the story ends, and where responsibility begins.